Hello, I'm Gregorio. I'm the department head of the Department of Cellular and Molecular Medicine in the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona. It is my sincere privilege today to serve as an interviewer of Dr. Robert McCuskey, my former department head here at the University of Arizona, who has been selected by the American Association of Anatomists for its Living History Project. This project documents the professional lives of prominent anatomists by creating a recorded interview discussing their lives and career in an effort to preserve their memories for future generations. Bob, I'm really honored to be here today to have this opportunity to spend time with you and to learn about your career. I'd like to begin with an overview of Bob's career. Why don't we start by having you share a little information about your life and about those influences, people, books, parents who have contributed to your career development.
Thank you, Carol. It's a real pleasure as well as an honor to be asked to do this. And I might start by saying that I was brought up in a family of academic family. My father was the professor and head of the departments of astronomy as well as mathematics at that time Case School of Applied Science in Cleveland. Later it became Case Institute of Technology, and then somewhat later it merged with Western Reserve University, which was physically right next door to become Case Western Reserve University. But my father at an early age had me doing scientific things, helping him with some of his astronomical research and celestial mechanics, as well as coding stars on photographic plates, and also working with some of the early computers in the 1950s. I was very fortunate to also have summer experiences in one of the county parks outside of Cleveland, where the naturalists there would taught us a lot about birds and plants and nature, and had developed quite an interest actually even in morphology at that time, doing a few dissections of frogs and so on when I was about 12 or 13 years old. Subsequently, I had the privilege of being able to go to Western Reserve Academy, which is a private boarding school in Hudson, Ohio, just south of Cleveland, as a legacy scholarship student. Both my parents had graduated from there, as well as one grandparent and several uncles. So I was basically a legacy student. And there I had the really distinct pleasure of interacting with the person who was taught biology, Tin Wei Yong, who taught us a lot about animals, and particularly herpetology and snakes and reptiles, as well as how to do taxidermy on animals, which furthered my interest in morphology. And he was, as it turned out, was working on his PhD in biology at the University of Arizona during that time, and did his work, brought back rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, scorpions, and other creatures from the desert Southwest to the lab, and the biology lab, and the biology students and the biology club participated in some of his research. My particular chore was measuring the growth rate of Gila monsters, and once a month I had to pick up the Gila monster and measure it from nose to anus, and then put it back. I got quite good at it, even without using a glove, which I was supposed to use, but it was too awkward. But looking back on it, I'm sure if my parents knew what I was doing at that time,
you'd be in trouble.
They'd be in trouble. Right.
So it's clear you've had a very early exposure and interest in science. Can you expand more on how you became interested in anatomy, as broadly defined as you'd like it to be?
Yeah, I was very fortunate that during my time as an undergraduate student at Western Reserve University, I was a major in biology with a secondary major in chemistry. And I was fortunate to meet Dr. Edward Block at the medical school through a friend of mine who was working part-time for him. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine was going to be leaving the job, and thought I might be interested. And so I went and met with Professor Block, and was immediately fascinated when I walked into the lab, and there was filled with electronic equipment. He was one of the early pioneers along with Charlie Lozier at the medical school in Cleveland, to use television imaging of living tissue and living organs. And I was quite fascinated because I had one of my hobbies had been amateur radio, so I was fairly familiar with electronics. Anyway, he hired me on the spot to be a part-time employee. I ended up working about 20 to 30 hours a week in his lab throughout my undergraduate career. And during that time, I also applied and was accepted for graduate school in biology. I was going to originally work with an embryologist who was the head of the Department of Biology. And at the time, I had no idea that there was graduate programs in the medical school in anatomy and physiology and so on. But this was brought to my attention late in my senior year, and Dr. Block asked if I would be interested in being a graduate student with him in the Department of Anatomy. And furthermore, would I be interested in a joint MD, PhD degree? And I explored this a bit and decided this was really a thing to do, and was accepted. And in the fall of 1960, started in the medical school class of 1964, and proceeded to work on the degrees. But after the first 2.5 years, I pursued just the PhD. Didn't finish up the MD part because I was so fascinated with research and got so involved in my projects that I decided that's what I wanted to do for my career.
Where did you go to graduate school, and what experiences in graduate school influenced your career?
Well, as I said, I was in the graduate program at the Department of Anatomy at Western Reserve University, now Case Western Reserve University. And it did affect my career dramatically. Dr. Block was one of the pioneers and leaders in the field of microcirculation and imaging of living tissues. And he was, along with some of his cohorts at Mass General Hospital, John Irwin and others, took it upon themselves to make sure that at scientific meetings I got to meet very prominent people, many of whom came through the lab. And all of this stimulated me to go on to do my research in microcirculation of the liver under Dr. Block's tutelage.
So what universities or institutions have you worked at, and what experiences from those institutions influenced your career?
I think several people as well as institutions have influenced my career. After finishing up my PhD at Western Reserve University in 1965, I joined the faculty at the University of Cincinnati as a instructor and of anatomy. And Dr. Roger Crafts was the department head, who was a tremendous mentor in terms of not only research stimulation, but also as a mentor and as a good example of a very good department head who was very good in dealing with people, as well as being very fair, as well as demanding excellence. I was also very fortunate that during that time to continue to be introduced to a variety of national, internationally well-known scientists, and who also were quite stimulatory to my progression. And again, I was also lucky too that the very first grant I wrote in 1965 was funded on the first round, which is something of interesting. Although at that time, the NIH had more money than they knew what to do with. Congress gave it more than they asked. So, but it was, I think, Roger Crafts and also one of the other faculty at the University of Cincinnati, Howard Meineke, both of whom were interested in hematopoiesis. And at that time, I was working in the area of hematopoiesis in the liver. We joined up as partners and collaborators, and had a about 14 years of collaborative research with numerous grants, numerous publications, and during that time I developed a number of international friendships, particularly with people in Europe and Japan, which led to a lot of collaboration and as well as later on being awarded a number of prizes from both Japan as well as Germany. And then I was honored to be selected as a department head of anatomy at West Virginia University, where I went and spent 8 years and had a lot of very good collaborations, again, with people around the country as well as overseas. And during that time in West Virginia also felt very honored to have, I think it was 4, maybe 5 of my faculty went on to become department heads at other institutions, as well as several of them being officers of the American Association of Anatomists. Subsequent to that, then I moved to, in 1986, to University of Arizona, mostly because to become the department head of anatomy. And again, it was largely because I had a number of friends here in the Department of Physiology in the microcirculation field who I'd known for years, and it provided an opportunity for some real significant collaborations within the institution.
Great. So could you tell me something about your most memorable publication or your first publication? What can you tell me about them?
Well, in terms of publications, there were several that I felt were memorable. The first one, of course, was memorable because it was the first one, and that was the publication of my dissertation on the distribution of hepatic arteries and regulation of blood flow and the role of sinusoidal lining cells in the liver in controlling blood flow, and which was published in the American Journal of Anatomy in 1966. And I was very pleased to have that published. Subsequent to that, there were several other publications which were I viewed as milestones. We were among the first group to begin to identify, for example, that glycosaminoglycans of different types were contributory to the hemopoietic inductive microenvironment for erythropoiesis versus granulopoiesis. That subsequently went on and became a big thing in teratology for development. We also were involved with a lot of things developed using with the role of the sinusoidal endothelial cells in the liver in aging, as well as in injury and dysfunction in the liver, for example, in terms of simultaneous in binge drinking and the use of acetaminophen or Tylenol. So I guess there were a number of publications that I thought were highlights, but I don't know as I'd single any one out as being more or less than the others.
Great. So could you share some philosophy or some advice that is relevant now?
Oh, that's a tough one, Carol. Things have changed so tremendously over the last 50 years. But I think the advice I would give to any new people in the field there are a couple things. One is that integrity and honesty is paramount. And during my years in science, I did run across a few people who were dishonest or unethical, both in the United States as well as overseas. And it's a very difficult thing to deal with, because you want to be open and discuss your science with everybody, even though some of it may not be published. And for most people, that's okay, but you do have to be a little bit cautious, because people will steal ideas. And what I see now and what I saw during the last 10 years when I was sitting on study sections and reviewing things is that there were evidences of people stealing other people's stuff. And this really should be avoided and, as well as punished. The other thing advice I have for young people is the same as I've had for 50 years. If you want a 9-to-5 job, this is not for you. You really have to be willing to dedicate your life to this and be willing to work 60 to 80, maybe even more hours per week, to especially when you're young, especially when you're in the early stages of your career, because without working hard and diligently, you aren't going to get there. You aren't going to get promoted. You aren't going to get the publications done, and it's a hard job. But it's also the most stimulating and rewarding experience when you've done it well, you've done it good, you've been rewarded, maybe not financially, but intellectually, and it can be a great career.
Over the many years of your career, anatomy or the specific field of anatomy has changed immensely. From your perspective, do you have any thoughts about what the future looks like for anatomy?
Well, that's a tough one, Carol, because the anatomy, the science is evolving. And I think what I've seen over the last 20 years or so is that it's really a blurring of between the disciplines. So it's very hard to sort out anatomy from physiology, from molecular biology, because in reality it's all a matter of interfacing structure with function, whether it's at the molecular level, whether it's at the ultrastructural level, whether it's at the cellular level, or whether it's at the gross anatomical level. I always viewed anatomy as the study of structure and function, no matter what level you were at. But on the other hand, I also see that what worries me a little bit is that I think many graduate programs, maybe by necessity, I don't know, many graduate programs over the years have become very narrowly focused. And as a result, I think sometimes the basic Catholic training of the students suffers, so they don't necessarily see the forest through the trees. I remember one young person who came and gave us a seminar about 5 or 6 years ago, who was involved with studying muscle in the heart at a molecular level, but had no concept of the structure of the heart. And it was a little bit disappointing. I feel very fortunate that I had the broad training I did, as I had all of the first and second year of medical school. So I had anatomy, physiology, microbiology, pathology, and so on. And I think that gave me a broader perspective, and it was reflected in my research activities, all of which were very clinically relevant and focused on what was potentially disease-related problems.
So it's clear you've had many, many remarkable accomplishments. Give me your top one. What's your biggest accomplishment?
Wow, that's a difficult one.
Everyone is difficult.
I don't know. There were several, I guess. I felt very good about a number of our research activities and publications, particularly in the areas of both hemopoiesis as well as in the liver, and in terms of mechanisms involved with binge drinking and liver dysfunction, as well as aging, as well as in septic shock. But on the other hand, I think there's another thing I also felt very good about having been able to develop, with the help of a lot of very good faculty like yourself, 2 departments of anatomy, cell biology, and molecular biology, going from basically departments which, when I started with them, were somewhat dysfunctional because of interpersonal difficulties within the department. And I think particularly here at Arizona and to some degree at West Virginia, we were very fortunate to be able to hire a lot of very good young people, including yourself, who we built a very cohesive, collaborative, congenial department, which when I stepped down as chair in 2005, we were ranked, I think, 10th in the country in terms of NIH funding by the NIH.
You did a great job as a department head. You built a wonderful program. But I have another tough question, of course. So what was the hardest lesson of your career?
I think the hardest lesson was to accept the fact that not everybody is honest and has integrity. That was a very disappointing thing. I remember the first time I got stung. Well, I first saw it when I was a graduate student, and we had a person come to Block's lab in Cleveland to learn how to do high-speed cinematography of the microcirculation so that you could film on 60-millimeter film blood flow in small vessels and slow the flow down so you could look at some of the biorheology of the interaction of blood cells with the blood vessel wall. And he had pioneered this. And this person took the results, and about a month or two later, my mentor, Dr. Block, received a paper for review from Science from this, and this person was the first author. There was no reference in there to any of the help that he had gotten from, or data which he had gotten from the laboratory in Cleveland, and it was a rude awakening as a young student that there were dishonest people out there. And then I've cited a number of other incidences during the years where there has been some blatant dishonesty. And also in terms of university politics, as you well know, there can be some pretty nasty things done which are not particularly ethical. And it's disappointing, but that's life.
Yeah. So I have two final questions. What keeps you busy now?
Well, since I retired, I guess it took me about 4 or 5 years to phase out all my professional obligations. I was an adjunct professor at the University of Tromsø in Norway, and only finished that obligation about 2 years ago. So I was going to Norway, where I still had a collaborative research project, and I had an NIH grant until about 2 years ago. So that kept me busy for a while, and more recently I focused a lot of time on family genealogy, both on my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family, which we have, along with a couple of my cousins, traced back to the 16th and 1700s in Ireland and England. In addition, I still pursue my childhood hobby of amateur radio, and I still play golf, or try to.
Great. And so the last question is, do you have any unfulfilled aspirations?
No, I don't think so. I think I've really been very lucky. I've had a great life, a great career, and it's a large part due to the influences of a lot of very prominent people, as well as a very supportive family, and again, a lot of very supportive professional friends and faculty, including yourself.
Wow, thank you. I'd like to thank you so much for spending time today answering these questions, and a lot of people will benefit from watching this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.